Okay, let's dive in. We're tackling a really deep question today. It's about divine predetermination versus our own free will, and specifically the weight on someone called to, well, to warn others. What if the warning doesn't happen? Is fate sealed? Or do our actions, maybe even our inactions, change things? We've got some fascinating sources using powerful biblical stuff to explore this. So our mission is to unpack these ideas for you. Right, so the sources jump straight into Ezekiel, yeah. Talking about this warner, like a watchman, what's the core idea about their role?
Well, it's the stakes, really. They're incredibly high. The text basically says, look, if you're the watchman and you see danger, but don't warn the wicked, they die in their sin, sure. But, and this is the kicker, God holds you responsible for their blood.
Wow, okay, so your failure has eternal consequences for someone else.
Potentially, that's one way to read it initially. But if you do warn them, and they ignore it, they still die in their sin, but you've done your part. You've saved yourself, essentially.
Which really brings up that big question, doesn't it? Does the warner's action or inaction actually decide someone's ultimate fate?
Exactly. And this is where our sources present two kind of competing ideas.
Okay, let's hear them. What's the first take?
So one argument leans into that initial reading. It suggests, yes, someone who could have been saved might die because they weren't warned. It implies the warner's choice directly impacts that person's eternal outcome. Like salvation was a possibility, but the missing warning closed the door.
That puts a terrifying amount of weight on the warner.
It really does. It suggests our actions have these immense direct consequences for other salvation.
But then how does that fit with God being sovereign, knowing everything? What's the alternative view the sources lean towards?
Right. The alternative, and the one the sources seem to favor, shifts the focus back to God's plan. It argues that if someone is truly one of God's sheep predestined for salvation, God will ensure they get the warning. If one warner fails, God would, find another way, send someone else maybe.
Ah, okay. So God's plan isn't fragile. It can't be messed up by one person failing.
That's the idea. From this perspective, God's predetermination stands firm. If someone dies without repenting, even if they missed a specific warning, it's because God already knew their ultimate choice. They weren't, in this view, destined for salvation anyway.
So this view rejects the idea that someone truly meant for life could be lost just because a warner messed up.
Precisely. It emphasizes God's sovereignty over the whole process.
Okay, that's a powerful concept. God's plan holds. But wait, does that mean the warner is sort of off the hook if the person was doomed anyway?
Not at all. And this is crucial. The sources are really clear here. Even if the outcome is predetermined in God's mind, the duty to warn is absolute. It's a direct command.
So disobeying the command is the issue, regardless of the outcome.
Exactly. Failing to warn makes the warner guilty of disobedience, period. They become, in a spiritual sense, culpable, almost like a murderer, because they ignored God's instruction. The warner can't know who's sheep and who isn't. Their job is just to obey.
And what about the person on the receiving end, or the one who doesn't receive it? Where is their responsibility in all this?
Well, the sources bring it back to individual choice, too. People often reject truth, not just because they weren't warned effectively, but because fundamentally they love sin more than truth. God gives opportunities, works within free will. If someone genuinely seeks truth, the idea is they'll find it.
And if they prefer falsehood?
Then they might be drawn to false teachers who, interestingly, face an even stricter judgment themselves, according to James. Ultimately, the sources suggest if someone's heart truly desired repentance, God, knowing that heart, would ensure they got the warning they needed.
This whole interplay is complex. The sources even mention Judas Iscariot, right? And that chilling line, it would have been better if he had not been born. That sounds like extreme personal responsibility, almost like a choice about existing. How does that fit?
Yeah, it's a profound statement. But the sources use it to highlight something specific. It doesn't undermine God's sovereignty. Instead, it shows that even a terrible choice, like Judas's betrayal, was foreseen and integrated into God's larger plan. God knew Judas's choice, but the choice and the terrible weight of it was still Judas's own.
So even the worst choices are accounted for?
Accounted for, yes. If Judas had chosen differently, God's plan would encompass that too. It underlines both God's foreknowledge and genuine human responsibility.
So, wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for you listening? It seems we're left with this tension, right?
Definitely. A tension between God's absolute sovereignty, his predetermined plan, and our very real, very weighty human responsibility. Responsibility to choose truth and maybe to share it.
Yeah, and maybe the question to ponder is this.
How does knowing God has already factored in all choices, our successes, our failures, change how we feel about the urgency of what we do? And maybe, paradoxically, how does it affect the peace we might find in his ultimate plan? Something to think about.